So, it's May. Things are a little rough. It's a little rough around the office. So you gotta take matters into your own hands. I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, anyway. So first of all, why is there such a huge lull between the last update video and this update video? The short answer is that between all the people that are in the background working on Fable's End, that's myself, that's Kwame, that's our two programmers, all of us have to work. And annoyingly, I had a little bit of freelance work in the beginning of the year, but I did have a big stretch where I had a lot of spare time to work on Fable's End. Now, in the past month, I've been booked solid with freelance work. And the freelance work that I do is very physical. So I work in a fabrication shop where I'm running things through a table saw, I'm building sets, or I am on set doing prop styling or set dressing. And both of these jobs are jobs where I'm on my feet all day, or I'm lifting things, or I'm doing a lot of manual labor. And this sort of job can be extremely physically exhausting. So I come home from work and my goal is to try to get something done on Fable's End. And then sometimes it's just, I get in front of my computer and I stare at it for an hour and nothing gets done. And I've had to take this work because the work was slow at the beginning. There's like seasons of ebbs and flows as a freelancer, and it's often very swingy. Like you'll go where there's nothing, and then it will be like more work than you could ever do in your entire life in one period. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build up some savings so that I can take a more extended period during the summer and try to bang out as many things as possible. And because of that schedule, it's been really, really physically and mentally taxing to try to get anything done on Fable's End. Now, we've made a lot of progress in a lot of areas. One, Fable's End Online has taken huge leaps and bounds towards becoming an actual thing that people can play. Like I said earlier, we had our Steam verification, so we're good there. We have our servers set up, which is really great. It's just a matter of getting the polish and working out all the bugs, and then setting up all of the different menu systems that we want available for our alpha test. Now, in other fronts, with the PPC, the pre-production copy, let's talk about the pre-production copy right now. One of the most difficult things about the pre-production copy on my end is that because I handle all of the graphic stuff, this includes anything you see that's a visual in the game at all, that's me. That's the graphic design, that's the rulebook layout, that's the illustration, it's the card frames, it's any promotional materials that we have. I have to design those and put those together. We don't have the budget to hire somebody. If we did, we would blow our entire budget. We wouldn't have any money left. So that being said, the pre-production copy, I am the one that handled all the files, and it took a long time to get all those files compiled because the specs that are required for sending files to a printer or manufacturer weren't specs that I had initially set up on my computer and for all the Fable's End files. And this is really boring, but it's part of the process. It's just how the sausage is made. And so I had to take all these files and individually make sure that everything was okay with them. You know, you have to double check to make sure all the text is fine. You double check to make sure the file type is fine. You double check to make sure that you have the correct proportions and the correct measurements, and then saved as a CMYK, as a PDF, without the bleed border that I have on it to make it look like the card is, cut. I have to remove that. So it's a very time-consuming process, and it took a couple of weeks for me to actually get all the files together and then to send them over. Now that they've been sent, there's a lot of feedback going back between us where I'm getting art proofs from the team over at our manufacturers, and I have to prove them, and sometimes I look at them and I say, actually, this isn't right, we have to change this thing. And we're working with a liaison who is an American, because we are printing in China, as most game companies are. And sometimes there's a little bit of a delay, like I'll ping him and he will ping the art department in China, and then they will get back to him, and then they will get back to me. So sometimes there might be like a 3-day delay before I get a response to something, or he gets a response to something, because he may email me and I may be trying to figure out how to do this thing on my end where it's like a file or I just cannot get to it because of my work schedule. So it's been a bit of a back and forth and a journey. We're in the finish line. It's just like approving the last final thing, which is getting our foil patterns correct. And it's a file issue that the manufacturer is having, where they're sending us back the files and they're saying, this foil isn't fitting the card, and that's something I have to address. Once we get that approved, then it's like push the button and then the pre-production copy gets manufactured and then we get it sent to us. Once we get that pre-production copy, we will have a video on it where we go over the whole thing. We will do like an unboxing video. We'll show all the components that you're getting, including all the cards that you're going to get, and and what it should look like on the inside. We will probably end up changing some things because we know that once we get the pre-production copy, there will be some issues that we have with it. But for the most part, it should be what we want. And hopefully the cards themselves will be exactly what we're looking for. Man, I'm having the hardest time. There's no script. We're off. We don't do scripts here, okay? There's no scripts. It's just me, my prop sword, this very convincing backdrop, and my iPhone, and a ring light, and there's a stool here you can't see, but it's there. It's just us. No plan. Nope. We don't have plans here, all right? We don't follow any plans. We are here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to fly by the seat of our pants until we lose our pants. So, what's going on with Fable's End Online? Well, every deck is playable. We are officially Steam certified. That means that we have all of our Steam stuff figured out. There's a more technical way to say this, but basically we reached out to Steam. They said, yeah, this sounds great. So now we have access to Steam. You will have access to Fable's End Online through Steam as soon as we are finished with our alpha build and our beta build, and we do all of our testing and we finally release it. It works. We also have our servers up and running, which means that our quick match option, where you just click on the quick match, it will match you up with a random person who is also playing Fable's End. That all works. It's pretty exciting because it means that theoretically we could just ship the game as is and people could just get on and play. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work to do still on that front. So there's a lot of polish that needs to happen before we can release the game. We have to do some alpha testing. We have to do some beta testing. It is very important that people get their hands on the game because we need to figure some UI stuff out. Most of it we have set, but I think once we do our once we do our alpha testing, it will all become clear. It will all make sense. So there's a ton of UI polish that the game still needs. And some of it is stuff that we can do on our own because we know already what needs the polish. And some of it's stuff that we're going to present to our testers, and they're going to give us a ton of feedback about, hey, when this happens, there should probably be a prompt here, or we found that the UI overlay was confusing, or we should move this thing here because while we're playing, it makes more sense for it to appear here. We're going to get a lot of feedback from the way the game currently looks that will be applied towards the next version. And then when we finally release the game later on in the year, it will have that level of polish and that level of detail that hopefully new people who have never played before can get into the game and play no problems. All that being said, Fable's End Online still has tons of hours of polish that it needs. It's kind of hard to believe we've already spent hundreds of hours on it. We've been programming this since July of last year, so it's almost coming up on a year of programming. And a lot of the programming has happened kind of in between our jobs. Our two programmers are still in school, one just graduated, and they've been doing it in between class time, in between any jobs that they have. And we've been having a weekly meeting on Wednesdays for about 9 months now. And in that weekly meeting, we've seen this very, very incremental progress where it started with like, hey, here's a screen and I have a card on it. And it's like, okay, well, that's nothing. To this actually fully plays from start to finish. And you can start up a game and everything works. All of the mechanics work. All of the automations are functioning correctly. The game automatically draws you cards. When you set a shield, it automatically moves you to the next step. It shows you your options when you attack automatically. So if you attack your opponent's story or you attack your opponent's hand, and those options are available, it will be there. But if they're not, then they aren't there. It's a lot. There's like really cool stuff. There are no animations. And that's the big thing about the game so far, is that even though we put so much time into it, there's still a little bit of a bare bones element where it looks and feels great and we're really proud of what we've done. It is not the AAA Magic the Gathering Arena Master Duel, fully animated experience that you might get with those games. And we don't have the budget for it. We just don't. We will, maybe eventually, we would love to. And that's the plan, is to get it to that state eventually where it is fully, it does have that AAA polish. And we are going as much polish as we possibly can with it at the moment, but it is a Herculean effort to get it to the state it's been in, or to get it to the state that it is in now. And it is really exciting because I played last week, and that was the first time I played the game where it felt like I was actually like playing Fable's End, the game, and not trying to design the UI or not trying to build the game or not trying to address some issue or some bug or find some bugs. It played pretty seamlessly. It was really nice. So that's exciting. That's a really big deal. Fable's End Online, it's happening. It's going to take some time before it's ready for a full release. We are getting close to our alpha testing. We really want to make sure that we've got everything figured out before we make an announcement as to when. Hopefully within the next month we can start to alpha test, but don't hold me to that, because we have to make sure of a lot of different variables. We have to make sure that all the server stuff is working. We have to make sure that there are no bugs in the game. There's a lot of polish we want to put on it before we show it to people. And that takes time. It takes a lot of time to put polish in the game. So I hope you're looking forward to it. It's a game changer for us, and it will be a game changer for you as well. And we'll keep you updated on it. So expansions, what's the deal with expansions? Well, the thing about our expansions is it took us a while before we set exactly what the contents of our expansions are going to be. Now, this is its own video that I will do. I'm going to put together a whole thing about how we would do our expansions, what the contents of our expansions are, exactly how we want to package them, how we want to sell them, and what you can expect when you purchase an expansion. It's been a really interesting journey because we're sort of following the model of other LCGs or ECGs, and we're trying to incorporate some of the elements of a TCG to make for an expansion that feels like it's its own unique contained experience. Again, I won't get into it now, but we have the exact content set, and that's pretty cool because that gives us exactly what cards are going to what expansion. And I'd say the first 3 to 4, those contents have been set pretty much. The cards are in those expansions. I would say almost all of them are designed. They need a lot of development though, and that's the big key. And I'm going to get into that in the next section about how much time it takes to develop things in a trading card game, and why, if you're ever interested in making one, you should test the crap out of it. We're doing a lot of preliminary work to set up the meta for the game for the next 2 to 3 years. That means that we have to design a lot of cards, test those cards, and then take the time to develop them. Now, that sounds like some of those things are the same thing. They're not the same thing. When I design something, what I do is I say, this is a card that I think would be fun for the game, or this is a concept that was exciting. Kwame and I often will be spitballing, and we'll come up with a lot of ideas that are really exciting to us, and we'll say, okay, how do we make that into a card? Is that a mechanic in a specific card? Is it just a one-off? Is it a whole kingdom that does this thing? And what happens is, after those meetings, after we have those talks, I'll go home and I'll run through a few different variations of cards and put up a mock-up. And I'll do like a little sketch and then throw that into the computer and then make a little mock-up card. And that mock-up card gets printed out. Then I do some testing on my own. A lot of times what you think a card will do, it doesn't always do. And this is one of the key things about design that's really weird, especially even when you're really familiar with a game system. The design process isn't always predictable. You think a card will do something. You'll design it with the intent to do something. And then when it comes to the application of that effect or the application of that mechanic, the card does not behave the way you want it to. And there's all these little quirks that come into play where you're like, oh, I forgot that, this happens at the end of the turn, and most of the time the game state at the end of the turn isn't ideal for this kind of effect. In fact, this effect is kind of boring when you phrase it this way. So then sometimes it goes back into the meat grinder and gets a revision. But those testing sessions also can reveal that it doesn't have a great first impression, but the mechanic or the design of the card is actually really sound. It just needs the correct deck to be built in order for it to be maximized. And that's another really weird, careful area that we have to be in, because we want to make sure that when players see cards that they get excited about them, not go, oh, well, this card sucks. And then 5 years down the line, someone's like, actually, this card's amazing. And you're like, oh, what? I had no idea. And then, no one was playing that card that we spent days, months trying to develop and design. The third part of this, after we do the testing, there's initial testing. Testing is just to make sure that the card works, right? If that card comes into play, and it should be very clear whether it's working or not from your first few plays of a card. Sometimes it's incredibly broken, and that becomes obvious right away. You'll just put it in play and you'll be like, yeah, this card's broken. Like, it's way too strong. It just automatically does something it's not supposed to. And those initial tests will kind of give us the initial information that we need in order to make the card what it wants to be, or what we think it should be. And sometimes we will test a card and the testing will come back that, oh, it's not quite right, and then we'll test it again. It's still not quite right, and then we'll test it again, and then realize, like, actually this card is supposed to be in a different kingdom, or it's supposed to be a different rank, or its power is too high, or we need to completely overhaul this effect altogether. Then after we do that, and we get everything where we like it with the card, then we run it through development. And what development means for us is that we put it through the grinder. We put it into decks. We start testing. We play tons of games with it and see what happens, because the card itself may be balanced in a vacuum, but it may not be balanced within the overall meta of the collection of cards that are existing in the game on our end. Not just the core set, but all the expansions and all the mechanics. And one of the things that's really, it's both exciting, but it causes a lot of complexity in the design process is that a card can present really well. It can test in testing. It's great, and then when we start developing it, it's performing like a champ, and then all of a sudden it gets combined with some mechanic that's in some set that's way down the line, and it's just totally busted. Or it fails miserably. It just doesn't work in that environment anymore. Now that this mechanic comes into play, there's too many -1000 counters floating in the meta. There's too many +1000 counters floating in the meta. There's this ability that's going to come out that makes this card totally worthless. So we have to make sure that we're developing within the greater meta of where we want the game to go. And all of this takes a ton of time. It takes a ton of time. It is a really time-consuming process. And hopefully soon what we can do is we can start outsourcing some of that testing and some of that development to some of our loyal Discord members or some of our player base. It'd be really nice to get that player feedback. I'm a little hesitant to do this because I don't like spoiling things. I'm big on like designing something and putting a lot of care into it and then unveiling it because I think it's more impactful and more immersive and more exciting for you. Particularly where we're going to go with our expansions and what they do. I think I'm really, really excited about them. They do require a ton of work though. And for our goal of hitting at least four expansions by the end of the year, it is going to be a lot of work to get those together. I don't know if we'll hit that goal. Definitely by the time the core set is available to people, there will be an expansion ready. There's only like a few modifications we want to make to the expansion, and those modifications are things that are, because we've been going so far into the future, we're having to go back and revisit and being like, let's adjust this by 1000 power just because we know this is coming. Or this effect is really powerful because this effect happens later in the game, or there's a particular counter that comes into play and we have to make sure that we're playing nicely with that counter. So that expansion should be ready to go. But all this to say is that this is one of the areas where there's a lot of time spent. And it's a lot of like, you make a card, you test the card, you go, is that the right fit? Well, maybe, but maybe it fits better here in this expansion. And then you kind of move things around. And then as you're moving things around, you discover something else, and then you make a new card here, and then you have to test this stuff. And it's, testing it within itself, testing it within its own kingdom, testing it within an alliance deck, playing an alliance deck against alliance decks, and understanding how that affects the tempo and the meta of the game. And if it feels right, then we can keep going with it. But if it doesn't feel right, then we have to make adjustments. So it takes a lot of time. Which brings me to future stuff. I know this is kind of in the same ballpark, but it's not exactly the same thing. There are two new ideas that have been in the works for the past year that are going to get introduced in the next year or two in the game. And we want them to be game changers in the best way possible. And it's really difficult to talk about them because one, they're still in development. They're still getting sorted out. Like there's a lot of different ways we can approach it, and we're trying to find the best one that feels the most natural with the way the game already plays, while also adding something that is really exciting and evocative and immersive. And that sort of thing takes time. And sometimes we may arrive at a place with this whole thing where we say, you know what, actually, the game is worse off if we introduce these things. Why don't we just scrap them? But we'll take some of those designs that we've already done and we'll try to incorporate them elsewhere in the game. So this is guaranteed to happen in the game. It's more there are these things that we've been working on that I think are really exciting that I can't talk about right now because we don't even know if they're going to work in the long run. But the groundwork being laid right now for the foundational design work that we're doing is super exciting. It's really, really cool. And I hope that it goes the way that I want it to go, because if it does, then we will have something pretty cool for the game that I think players will really, really love. And it will give everyone a little bit more than what they have currently, or what they will have, but in the best possible way. And that's really all I can say about it right now. But it is another one of those things that contributes to how long it takes us to develop something, because this kind of has to be explored now so that when we get to our future expansions, we're not like, oh crap, we didn't account for this and the whole game falls apart because there's some enormous balance issue. We have to understand where these cards would potentially fit, or these designs would potentially fit into a larger meta. And if they distort the game experience in a way that is fundamentally changing what Fable's End is. And we have to try to preserve that fundamental experience while simultaneously introducing something that's really exciting and feels really different. And that is it's a razor's edge that we're walking. And again, like I said, I'm pretty committed to, I wouldn't say pretty, I'd say I'm wholly committed to only introducing something that makes the game better and not makes the game worse. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to do something like what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been doing, which is let's constantly introduce a new type of card, and then the entire meta of the game shifts to, well, this is the type of card you need now. You literally can't play without it. You don't have an option. This is the meta. And what we're trying to make sure that we are doing is either A, it's so great that everybody wants it, or it's not so, it has some built-in mechanism that balances it against a deck that chooses not to play with it. So that players that aren't interested in this don't feel like they are locked into terrible deck builds. Like there's still this world that you can build where there's a meta without these cards that's very viable. But these cards are also evocative and really fun, and if you want to use them, then you should be able to, and they should do something for you and your experience in the game that makes it more immersive and rich. So I wish I could talk more about this. One day I will reveal more about it and we'll get into it, and I'll do some videos where I start breaking down exactly what I'm talking about now. But that's going to be a ways away. There's some fun stuff coming. I'm sorry that it has been so long since we did an update. It's been a really busy time for myself. It's been a really busy time for Kwame. We have made these very big leaps, although it doesn't feel like big leaps for us. It feels like every day is like an incremental, tapping the chisel on this giant marble statue. And then eventually we take a step back. We're like, oh yeah, look, there's an arm there. That's cool. So we will be doing more updates, and I will do a whole thing just about expansions because that requires its own video. But until then, I hope this was satisfying. Maybe, I don't know, maybe. So yeah, that's the update. Bye.